Hi, and welcome to week 2 of the processing class. In this video, I'll give you an overview of what we're going to talk about this week so you can jump right into the videos and dig in. Last week, we talked about setting up a good foundation, and the goal was to create an image that used rectangles and ellipses. This week, we're all about animation. We're going to take those things and make them move. Now, to reach that point, we have to go through a couple of steps. The first step is to get a handle on something called a variable. A variable is really nothing more than a slot that can hold some kind of a value, and we'll see variables that hold all kinds of values. But for this week, the only values we're going to worry about are numbers. Now, every variable is an object, and every object in processing has a name. And there are some guidelines and rules for creating names. So we'll talk about how to name things, and then we'll talk about one special class of numbers called the integers. Those are really just whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll talk about ways of using them. Then we'll talk about another class of numbers called the floats, and that's really all the rest of the numbers. Those are numbers with a decimal point and then some other value, like 3.7 or 4.12. Together with the integers, we can describe all the numbers we're interested in. So you might wonder, well, why do we have both integers and floats? Why keep track of these two different kinds of numbers? Well, there's some really good reasons for that. And so I talk about that in this video, and then there's a special weird little gotcha that you can discover when you divide two integers. And I talk about that so that you don't get hung up on that gotcha. There are a few supplementary videos in this section. In addition to the integers and the floats, the basic variables that we'll be using, processing gives you a bunch of others that, frankly, you are not going to need for a very long time indeed. But I want to give that information to you. I want it to be available to you, and this seemed the natural place to provide it. So in addition to the variables we talk about, there are supplementary videos on longs, which can hold enormous numbers, something called scientific notation that allows you to write enormous numbers without typing them all day long, and then something called a double, which is something that lets you write both an incredibly huge and incredibly precise number. These are strictly supplementary videos, and you will probably never need to use longs or doubles. But if you ever want them, the information is there. Once we have variables under our belt, we're ready to go, and we can talk about animation. So first I talk about the general principles of animation that make it work, and then I talk about the thing that is at the heart and soul of animation in processing, a variable that processing maintains called frame count. Once you have frame count under your belt, you are good to go to create animation with processing. When you start writing programs that do animation, you'll find that they start to get a little bit longer and a little bit more complicated. To help you manage that, I talk about how to write these bigger programs. First, we talk about commenting. And this is something we saw last week. This is where you can leave a little note for yourself or for others describing what you're doing. Color coding is a system that processing uses in the processing window to help you quickly see what's going on with your code at a glance. Sadly, few programs are perfect, and usually when you first write a program, it's going to have one or more errors. It's no big deal, you find them and you fix them. One of the techniques for fixing errors is to print things out. You'll print out variables so that you can see what values they are, and that helps you understand what's going right and what's going wrong. The process of fixing errors is called debugging, because sometimes errors are called bugs. It's just the language, and so we talk about ways of debugging. There are some optional videos in this section if you want to customize the processing environment to make it more convenient for yourself. Processing offers you some preferences where you can set things like font size and various font colors. If you have a very large program, you can break it up into pieces, sticking each piece in its own file, which is managed by its own tab in the processing environment. These tabs are just like the tabs on a web browser. Finally, you may have a text editor that you know and love, and you would really rather use that than processing's built-in editor. You can use an external editor, and I'll show you how. Well, with this under your belt, you're ready to go for it. So we wrap up, I recap what we've talked about this week, and then I give you this week's homework. So to summarize what we're going to see this week, we're going to start talking about variables. And we'll talk about the names of variables, integers, which are whole numbers, floats, which are all the others. And then we'll talk about the issues that come up when we consider both integers and floats at the same time. And then there's the supplementary videos on the super precise, super big numbers called longs and doubles. Then we talk about making things move. And we talk about the principles of animation and how the variable frame count makes it all happen. Then we talk about programming, and I discuss comments and how to fix problems, which involves finding them and figuring out what they are, figuring out how to fix them. There are also some supplementary videos on how to customize the processing window in case you want to do some fancier things than we've done so far. Then I recap what we've done this week, and I give you your homework assignment, which you're really going to enjoy because it involves making animation. So let's get started.